Kia ora, welcome to Under the Checkered Flag, MotoGP edition. I'm your host Kate, and we're just going to jump right in. Welcome back. This week we are previewing the MotoGP in Jerez and digesting basically where we are in the championship. We'll be doing those two things before we move on to our podcast predictions and our podcast fantasy results, because we did manage to curse every single rider last weekend, and we're sorry for that. But if you are a rider, we do accept bribes to not curse you, because then you can have a race without the worry of the, you know, commentator's curse, they call it. But we will start with a championship checkup. We're going to just be recalling the top five in all three classes, and we will start with Moto3.
Starting with Moto3. It's been a bit different so far this year as it normally is, with there being a bigger gap between the top it's the top three riders really, then all of them behind there are really close. But currently in fifth position on the Husqvarna is Tatsuki Suzuki. In fourth is Ivan Otola after a crashing guitar and obviously crashing last time out. Honestly, sort of surprisingly for me, Joel Kelso's found his way up into third. I should probably be saying the points. Suzuki's on 22, Ortola 23, Kelso's on 28 points. And then there's a massive gap up to David Alonso in P2 on 63 points. And leading the standings currently is Danny Holgado on 65 points. I did have a question in here. I was just wondering if you guys think Ortola and Rueda, who are sort of the other two I was thinking could be in title contention, can still make up that sort of 40 point gap that they have currently.
I feel like they're both talented riders, and I feel like they've just been making a few mistakes. So I think if they build up consistency, I can definitely see them going for a title fight. I just think at the minute their just general race pace and consistency isn't there. But if they build that up, I can see it happening towards the mid end of the year.
I wouldn't rule it out, partly because it's Moto3, and if any title fight can be spiced up by just a single race, it's Moto3. So, yeah, I definitely wouldn't rule them out of the championship fight. It's going to be quite a hard thing to make up that deficit, because I think Holgado and Alonso are the kind of riders who won't make many mistakes, if any. But with Moto3, it's quite easy for another rider to make a mistake and then wipe out another rider and just ruin their race. So I'm not ruling it out.
I mean, historically, especially in Moto3, we've seen that anything can happen, even just looking back to last year, where at the halfway stage, Holgado had like a 50-point lead over second and ends up finishing fifth in the standings at the end.
Yes, so we could easily see, I suppose, the championship mixing it up a bit. Being so early in the season, anything can happen.
Okay, for Moto2, it's I wouldn't say very tight at the minute, but we actually have two people on the same amount of points, and the top is only 2 points in the difference. So I will start from fifth. We have Ayagura in with 33 points, and then in fourth, who I think Kate will be happy with, is Aaron Canet at 38 points, and then on the exact same amount of points in third, we have Alonso Lopez in 38 points as well. Makes me happy. Joe Roberts with 49 points, so pretty big gap of 11 points from second to third, but I think that can come in. I think that will build up quite quickly. And then with just 2 points in the difference after his win last time out in Kota, we have Sergio Garcia with 51 points.
I have to admit, I think Moto2 is still very much, we have no idea who's going to win. The races we've had so far this year have been awesome, because they've been not like we expected at all. I still think Furman and probably Lopez now are the best bets, but yeah, it's pretty much anyone's game in Moto2, I think.
Yeah, it's been tight battling. The fact that Sergio Garcia is like up there. I don't even know where his teammate is in here. Oh, he's actually Ayagura in 5th. Like, that's a pretty big jump. And then for Lopez, he's in 3rd. Aldeguer's in 7th. Like, I think he can build that up. He's got 1 podium this season. So now that he's got that, I think he'll find his confidence again, build up podiums, get some wins, and I'd say he'd find the top 3 of the standings, or at least win it.
I personally just don't think we've seen the best of Aldeguer yet. I feel like in the first 3 races, it's sort of just been him making mistakes and having to come back from it, because it just seems like early on he drops down the field and then just starts absolutely carving through everyone. So if he can get a couple of clean races together, get a couple of race wins under it, I do still think he's the favourite, personally.
Yeah, I agree. And that first Moto2 race of the year, we can't really count for anything just because of how absolutely wild the tyre degradation was for some of the riders. Now, I am going to actually do my top 6 for MotoGP. And the reason for that is that the person in P6 is only 1 point off the person in P5. And it's also who I put down for my prediction to win the year, and it's Brad Binder. He's in P6 on 49 points. In P5 is current reigning world champion Pecco Bagnaia on 50 points, which I think is quite a surprise because, yeah, that's. We thought he'd be a little bit higher. We did think he'd have quite a dominant season, so that's a bit surprising. P4, we have Pedro Acosta, the rookie. P3, Maverick Vinales on 56 points. Enea Bastianini on 59 points. And all the way at the front on 80 points is Jorge Martin, who, yeah, already has a 20-point gap, so he's definitely in the title fight. And given how this year started to shape up, my question for you two is, do we have to start talking about Pedro Acosta being an actual championship contender this year?
I think we'll need to give it a few more races before we can consider him a title contender. Like, obviously, we've seen him perform outstandingly in every race he's been in, but that's not to say the rest of the season couldn't go. Oh no, I'm not going to say that. The commentator curse, but that's not to say that the rest of the season won't go as well as we'd like it to. So I don't really want to have an opinion on that yet. As much as I love Pedro, I need to see more races and the same amount of consistency before I can consider him like general title fight, general title fighter.
I do agree with what Kelly just said. But I feel like we are slowly learning, just as a general basis, it's Pedro Acosta. He can do, or he can definitely exceed any expectations we have. But I do think it probably is a little bit early for him, especially being still on the satellite bike. But I feel like next year, especially if he does get on the factory bike, he'll definitely be able to challenge. But I just think it's a bit too early at the minute. He's still got a couple of rookie mistakes to make, even if it doesn't look like he does at the minute.
Moving on to our predictions, let's start with Moto3, and I'll go first. In P3, I have Rueda. I think even though he's just had his appendix out, he's going to be up there battling. P2, I have Alonso, and P1, I have Ortola. And for my reserve, I have gone with David Munoz.
For my Moto3 predictions, I'll go from P3 as well. For P3, I have David Alonso. P2, Danny Holgado, and then, of course, P1, Colin Vire, who somehow viewed my TikTok profile twice. Thanks, Colin. And for my reserve, I have Rueda. Even though he had his appendix out, I think he'll be able to do some good things. So, yeah, that's my predictions.
For Moto 3 in P3, I have Angel Piqueras. Honestly, that's just purely because he did quite well there in Red Bull Rookies Cup and Junior GP last year, and being Spanish, he'd know the track quite well. P2, I've gone with David Alonso. I feel like he'll put in another strong race. keep putting pressure on Holgado. And in first, I have gone Danny Holgado. Finished on the podium last year, I believe. Obviously in title contention form. I think he'll get the victory this time. And for my reserve, I've gone Ivan Ortola. Moving on to Moto2 predictions. In P3, I've gone for Aaron Canet. I just feel like he'll get back into the podium battles. Don't think he'll get a second win just yet, which would probably make one of us quite sad. But in P2, I've gone for Fermin Aldeguer. I feel like this will be one of the races that he doesn't make many mistakes in, just gets to the front, gets in the podium fight. Yeah, put some good points on the board. And to win the race, I've gone with Alonso Lopez. Just the general outlook on Moto2 this year seems to be that the speed-ups are almost the chassis you'd want to be on. Early days with the Pirelli tyres and all of that, so it could be genuinely anyone at this point. And as my reserve, I've gone Sergio Garcia, championship leader. I feel like if one of the other riders gets injured, he'll be up and around the top 5.
Okay, so for my Moto2 predictions going from P3, I have Sergio Garcia from his last win out in Kota. So that has given me a bit of faith, and I'm hoping he'll do well here in Jerez. And yeah, he's in P3. And then obviously for P2 and P1, had to go with my 2 favourites. So for P2, I have Alonso Lopez, and for P1, Fermin Aldeguer. Of course, every time. It probably will never change unless it's a track he's not very good at. And then as my reserve, after he completely failed me last time, I have Aaron Canet as my reserve.
I have also gone for Aaron Canet for my reserve, which is quite unlike me being the massive Canet fangirl. And it's the first time I've not put him in P1, but I'm trying to, counteract that commentator's curse. So if I root for him for my reserve, then, maybe he'll win. There's logic to this madness, I promise. In P3, I've put Fermin Aldeguer. I think he's going to be thinking long term in the championship and starting to not take too many risks. So I think he's going to start settling for points. In P2, even though he's not really been up there very much this season, I put Somcat Gentra. And in P1, I've gone with Alonso Lopez. So considering we've all got Aldeguer and Lopez on the podium, if there is a commentator's curse, we'll find out next week.
For MotoGP, for the sprint, I have Marc Marquez in P3 as always. I will always have him as a podium prediction. I just can't let that go now that he's on the Ducati. For P2, I have Ine Bastianini, who after he had a very bad start to last year. He's come back insanely this year, so I'm hoping he'll be able to fight for a podium here. And then in P1, our favourite sprint merchant, Jorge Martin. And as a reserve, I have Pedro Acosta, who I think will just miss out on the sprint podium. I don't think he'll be able to get it in a sprint because it's lesser laps, but he's my reserve for this because I think he'll make it to probably P5, P4, P5, P6 in around there.
In P3, I have put Brad Binder. He was really strong here last year. I'm really hoping he brings some of that into this weekend. In P2, I have put Jorge Martin because I think he is so strong and that sprint success is going to continue with that podium. But I think, like I am thinking with Fermin Aldeguer, that he will be thinking long term and championship. So I think he's going to settle for points. Because in P1, I have put Pedro Acosta. I think it's time. Given the form we've been seeing in Portugal, we saw him in P3. Coda, we saw him in P2. I think in the sprint race, we're going to see Acosta in the top spot. I also think that because it's Jerez and we saw how good he was last year, my reserve this year is going to be Danny Pedrosa. just because I'd love to see him on the podium, but it'd just be quite nice and quite wholesome.
For my sprint podium, I've gone for Pedro Acosta in P3. Again, historically, across all three classes so far, well, Moto3 and Moto2 so far, Jerez has been a track that he's done pretty well at. So I think he will get up into podium contention, have a really good weekend just in general. In P2, I've gone Maverick Vinales. I'm thinking he'll keep up his form of the last two races and hopefully keep challenging throughout the season. And shock horror, P1, I've gone Jorge Martin. And for my reserve rider, I've gone for Pecco Bagnaia. Hasn't looked on it on the sprint races so far this year. But I think he sort of just sits around that P4, P5 sort of region. I think he'll do better in the race, though.
That's quite interesting. I haven't even got Pecco on my predictions at all this weekend. So for this race in P3 on the podium, I've gone for Danny Pedrosa just because I really, really want to see it. And I don't think he's going to be too worried about meddling with Acosta, so I think he would overtake Acosta for a podium position because Acosta's not, on the factory team. In P2, I think we're going to have Jorge Martin. I think it's going to be a pair of P2s for him. In P1, this is my Binder fangirl coming through. He was really strong at Jerez last year, so I've got him in P1 with my reserve being Pedro Acosta.
Okay, so moving on to MotoGP race predictions. For P3, I have Pedro Acosta. Once again, I feel like even though Pedrosa will be here, I have the faith that Pedro will hold on to the podium place. So I have him in P3. And then for P2, for the first time making a bit of a change in my predictions, I have a KTM, Brad Binder, of course, not Jack Miller. I have Brad Binder in P2. I'm hoping he'll be able to gather some pace and bring back like the Brad we know, because we know he has pace, and we genuinely know he'll be able to do this. So I hold faith and hopefully not the commentator curse, and I have him in P2, and then in P1, never changing, Marc Marquez. I'm holding the faith that he brings back a win. I always have been, from last time out in Coda where he crashed from the lead. Not great, but I'm just hoping that that won't happen here and he'll stay P1 and win, and I'll be a happy woman. And then as my reserve, this isn't a sprint, so he can't be a merchant here. I have Jorge Martin because we all know he'll still get some points.
For my prediction, I have Pedro Acosta in P3 again. Same as I said before, I just think he'll have a really strong weekend. In P2, I've gone for Jorge Martin. Seems like he's figured out how to make the bike work quicker this year than he did in sort of the last few years, where he'd sort of pick up around halfway stage of the season. And in P1, I've gone for Pecco Bagnaia. Just over the last few years, it's been one of his best tracks, and it always sort of seems to be a theme that he comes into being more competitive during the European season. So I think this could be where he gets... Is it his first race win of the season?
Yeah, it would be his first race win of the season.
I'm not sure, but I do think he'll get the win this weekend. And as my reserve, I've gone Maverick Vinales. Again, I think he'll keep up this form for a bit at least and have a strong weekend.
Before we jump into our prediction results and our definite cursing of the riders, one thing I just want to touch on is this news that's, well, it's the rumour mill more than anything. So what seems to be happening is Pramac Ducati haven't yet signed with, well, they may not be Pramac Ducati. They may be something else because Pramac has not signed with Ducati. There are lots of rumours going around because both VR46 and Grassini want factory Ducati bikes. Pramac want an exclusive partnership with Ducati, same way they sort of do now, where they're the only ones at the factory bikes. So it's definitely going to be something to keep an eye on. That leaves if they don't sign with Ducati, we know Yamaha want a satellite team, so maybe they'll go there. We know KTM want a third team, so it's definitely a little bit of added spice, a little bit of silly season teams drama, which we may get to see more this year. So it's definitely something to keep an eye on. I think Pramac would be very silly, I suppose, to swap from Ducati, but we already know they're about to lose Jorge Martin, so you can see why now, if ever, is probably going to be the best time to change for them. Looking at how we've been doing for the championship so far, now last week Kelly was on double points, and it was extremely, extremely unfortunate that last week was also the weekend that we seemed to curse every single rider that we predicted, because we had Vire and Ortola in Moto3 who crashed out. We had Canet and Lopez across the board pretty much, and they did not have a good weekend. We all had Mark on the podium on Sunday, and yeah, crashed out as well. So we definitely didn't do very well. Kelly sits on 17 points, so not the best start, especially considering that is her double points. Me, I'm on 77 points and I'm in the lead, and
Oh,
PozzA is on 67 points, so not far behind PozzA.
Last weekend in Kota, I was slightly helped by the fact that I had Rueda to win and Alonso as my reserve rider, obviously with Rueda missing the race with the appendicitis.
Yeah, Alonso just slotted in and then he won the race, so that's 25 points that definitely helped you out there.
no, I just think I got very unlucky. Considering that was my chance for double points, and with double points, I got 17. Like, you guys are about 50 points ahead of me. I'm not catching up. I I could have gotten a good few points in Moto3, and for that I blame OP in the server, who said Fire's gonna crash, and I was like, no, we didn't. And then, like, I mean, I tell you guys, 2 minutes later, Vire was down. That man caused every single thing that happened in these races. I call on it, because my predictions physically could not have been that bad. Like, there's no way every single rider I went for could have crashed or just was bad. That's not possible.
Well, I mean, it is
But anyway,
possible.
rant over. Yeah, but like, for your first predictions to have every single one can do badly or crash out, how does that happen?
You definitely had the worst luck there, but you do have double points this week as well, so fingers crossed for your sake that you get some really good points, because you need them being at 17 when PozzA and I are
Hoping.
up there.
I hope so. Getting scared now.
As always, thank you so much for joining us. If there's anything that you do want to see come out of the MotoGP race in Jerez, please do let us know, especially if it's some of that on the ground content, and I will do my best to provide. We do just want to acknowledge a little bit of feedback we got last week regarding the motorcycle noise. So we will be trying to reach out and get some, different motorbike sounds to be able to play, so we don't always have the same, street bike sound. And if you're enjoying this, please do like and subscribe, because it really helps the channel grow. Have a wonderful week, and we will be here next week.